This week on Newsnight, a look at the final get-out-the-vote efforts by Republicans and Democrats in Central Florida.
We can't be the only Democrats in Florida.
I know how important it is to keep our freedom.
Plus, early voting and the work to win over those who say they're still undecided. Newsnight starts now. Hello, I'm Steve Maud. Welcome to Newsnight, where we take an in-depth look at the top stories and issues in Central Florida and how they shape our community. First tonight, the home stretch in the 2024 election campaign. Of course, the result in the presidential race is unlikely to be known on Tuesday night, if the polls are right anyway. Across Florida, Democrats and Republicans are busy trying to squeeze out any final remaining votes for their candidates ahead of polls closing. And as Crystal Knowles reports, independent and undecided voters are set to be key.
What we're going to do is ask them, have you sent in your mail ballot yet?
Canvassing varies slightly from person to person, but the goal is the same: get one more vote.
We're here today to ask whether or not you have voted yet.
Some people, like Rick Chouette, chair for the Addison Village Democrats, canvasses by rolling up door to door with his entourage.
The people we're talking to now are people that have registered for mail ballots. So we're trying to make sure that they, understand who to vote for and what amendments and judges and everything else.
On the other hand, 89-year-old Orange County Republican Gail Sims has a different approach. She uses her experience as a singer to reach her community.
Stand beside her. I sang for the then governor, and he later became president, Ronald Reagan. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago when I did canvassing for our governor, I had people ask me to come in and they said, "Would you sing for us?" And I would sing "God Bless America" for them.
Chouette says this year, volunteers are more energized. And while on their canvassing rounds, they've spoken to voters who are considering voting across party lines.
This is taking the fight to the streets, so to speak. Instead of just talking about it, we're actually going out and doing things this year.
There is one particular demographic both groups are hoping to sway.
After we win for Donald Trump, it really started.
According to USA Facts, a not-for-profit, nonpartisan group that analyzes government data, there are about 32 million registered independent voters, with Florida accounting for roughly 26% of that total.
Really what it comes down to is a lot of people have a middle ground, and we need to find what that is so we can deliver for the most voters that we can as possible.
Out of more than 187 million registered voters nationwide, eyes are on the millions of undecided voters.
If we do have opportunities to engage with people and we do it with facts and not emotions, and we listen and let them be heard, then that has been an effect. Not necessarily thousands of votes, because we're not doing thousands of those doors, but when we do have the opportunity, that can change a vote.
Crystal Knowles reporting there. Well, let's bring in our panel now to break it all down. Joining me in the studio this week is independent journalist Jason Garcia, writes the Substack Seeking Rents, always following the money around the place. Thanks for being here, Jason. Good to see you. Stephen Lemongello covers politics for the Orlando Sentinel. Nice to see you, Steve.
Good to be here.
And we've got Curtis McLeod with us, Spectrum News 13. Thanks for coming in, Curtis.
Happy to be here.
Good to see you. Let's start talking about early voting, shall we? I mean, the turnout's been pretty high here in Florida. The Republicans seem to have an advantage in terms of votes cast so far. That's according to UF's Election Lab, which gathers all this data together. What stands out to you guys from the numbers so far in Florida? Start with you, Jason.
Sort of analyzing early voting is always kind of a bit of a voodoo science, right? Because, I mean, we see this every election cycle. One party or the other is sort of claiming like huge tidings out of the early vote. But the challenge is you don't really know what the final electorate's going to like. It's all kind of meaningless until you see the final turnout. That said, there's a large Republican lead right now. I think that's consistent with the voter registration lead they've built in the state. There's nothing in these numbers yet that signifies like some sort of extra energized turnout on one side or the other. I think you're probably also seeing some of the impact of some of the election law changes that Republicans have pushed through that have made mail balloting much harder, which Democrats used pretty heavily 4 years ago. So, the question now just becomes, will you see Democrats turn out in proportionately large margins on Election Day. And the other thing to keep in mind here is we have no sort of sense yet on how NPAs are breaking, and that's ultimately what determines many of these races.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult to extrapolate, right, from early voting as to what's going to happen in the states. Do you agree that the election law changes that Jason referred to there might have an impact?
Oh yeah,
overall?
plus the fact of COVID changed how people voted in 2020. So we don't know, are these people voting by, or less people voting by mail now who would have voted by mail in 2020 but aren't going to do it this time because there's no pandemic? Are the various changes about people getting just wiped? Your mail-in requests getting wiped every 2 years, does that also play? People might not realize it until then, oh, well, I guess I have to vote in person then or something like that. So, you have no idea, are new people voting who wouldn't otherwise vote or didn't vote in 2020, or they're just voting differently? That's the thing you don't know.
Does that sort of jive with what you're hearing, Curtis?
Absolutely, it does. And I think one of the things here, because we've been seeing the long lines, and everybody's like, oh, I was just at the library yesterday with my kids, and we even saw the lines are very long. And I think a lot of people on first glance, you look and you see, and you're like, wow, a lot of people are coming out to vote. But to your point, I mean, it kind of is on par with the number, especially when you look at the Republican numbers. It's kind of on par with the registered voter base they've kind of built along the area now, depending
about
on
a million advantage.
Exactly. Now, of course, when you look at those pockets where those Democrats are, then you will see those numbers. Like you look at Orange County, and you're like, okay, well, that's where they're hiding when it comes to when you look at the state of Florida.
Do Democrats to have anything to point to? I mean, Donald Trump's going to win Florida, isn't he?
I think it's safe to think of Florida right now as a Republican-leaning state, so you would think Trump is the favorite. But again, we're talking about these are just showing us the registration of voters that have voted, not how they've actually voted. And so, one of the things you come back to is during the Republican primary, there's a really consistent anti-Trump vote among Republicans. So you have no idea how that might manifest itself. On the flip side, there's been a lot of concerns in Democratic circles that Kamala Harris has been losing ground a little bit with voters of color, particularly male voters of color. So you don't really know that every Democratic vote is a Kamala Harris vote, right? So there's just ultimately really no way to really extrapolate from these results.
I think Hillary Clinton was winning the early vote in 2016, so who knows.
Let's just quickly talk about Rick Scott's re-election effort against Debbie Merkes-Powell in the U.S. Senate race. Scott gave his campaign another $1.5 million this week. Both candidates were in Central Florida, I think, on Tuesday. How do you see that race poised, Steve?
If Scott wins by more than 1.1%, that would be a landslide for him. That's the most he's ever won by in all 3 of his victories. So he always wins, but he wins close. Then again, like you said, he can just put in as much money as he wants to just, if he needs a few million here or there, just to get some more ads, he can do that.
Another close race, no doubt, in the Senate race. I want to talk about Puerto Rican voters and their role in Florida this election, following comments at Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden at the weekend, in which one speaker described Puerto Rico as, quote, a floating island of garbage. Puerto Ricans make up a sizable voting group in our region, and we talked about that at our recent Newsnight Conversations discussion in Osceola County.
If we look at sort of the population movement of Puerto Ricans out here, it sort of resembles what happened in the 1940s and 50s in the northeastern state out there. And we see kind of like there's been a shift in that population here, and Florida has the state with the most Puerto Ricans of all the states out here. So definitely growing, the numbers are changing. But as long as there are economic opportunities, people are going to come here and they're going to have an impact in the community.
Well, that was Fernando Rivera from the Puerto Rico Research Hub at UCF saying Puerto Ricans have a significant impact on the community. I guess the question, let's start with you, Steve, is whether they'll have a significant impact at the polls.
Yeah, they always seem to do. Like Democrats seem to think, following the influx of people from Maria, from Puerto Rico, that would help them, but that has not been the case. Osceola went red in 2022. But that garbage comment from MSG seems to have really broken through to non-political people. We all follow politics, and all of us, but people who really are not paying attention to politics.
You've been getting reaction, right, from the Puerto Rican
in the Puerto Rican community. Our reporter talked to people in Osceola County who were just they're just angry about this. It's people who don't follow politics or on Facebook, or just talking about it on Facebook, talking about it with text and things like that. So. Whether that will actually lead to votes or anything, or changed votes, or people turning out, because the Hispanic turnout for Democrats was rock bottom in 2022, who knows?
Well, let's talk about some local races, because there's a lot of local races in our area that you guys have been watching closely, and I'm going to ask you what stands out to you. What are you looking for on Tuesday night, Jason?
I think folks here know that Republicans hold a supermajority in the Florida legislature right now. The question of that supermajority will be decided in Orlando. Just think about it this way. There are 120 seats in the state house. There are only about a dozen competitive races statewide. Half of them are in Orlando. They're all over, right? They're in East Orlando around UCF. They're in Seminole County. They're in the theme park area. Democrats need to flip 5 seats to end the supermajority. They could do that in Orlando alone. Or if you're a Republican who wants to maintain the supermajority, you win these Orlando races, you've got it in the bag.
Steve, what about you? What are you watching?
Oh yeah, like you said, all these state house races in Central Florida, most of them, like these surrounding Orlando, on paper are Democratic leaning. If they were in their current configuration in 2020, they would have been won by Biden. A bunch of them you have Nate Douglas, the Democrat, versus Susan Placencia here in the UCF area. That's a big one. A lot of money coming in there, and you have David Smith versus Sarah Henry in the southern Seminole County area. All of these, on paper, should be leaning Democratic. All went red in the red wave of 22 due to low turnout. And the question is, was that just a low turnout for Democrats situation 22, or is that just going to be just the status quo for Florida going forward, and all of these, quote unquote Democratic leaning seats are just going to go Republican?
Yeah. Curtis.
One I've been following closely is House District 45 race with Leonard Spencer, the Democrat, and an incumbent Representative Carolina Amnesty. Very interesting race here, and of course, with the situation surrounding her, the indictments and everything. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with this particular race. Leonard Spencer, businessman, former Disney executive, trying to unseat her in this particular race here. I can't say whether it'll be a close race or not. I mean, I think that with the districting being redrawn, I mean, we know that particular district for a long time was Democratic, but things flipped, when everything was redrawn. But it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I know in speaking with Leonard Spencer earlier this week, I mean, he says they're doing all they can to make sure people know the issues that are important to him, and also spoke with Carolina Amnesty as well, and she says that she's out talking to people in the communities, trying to make sure they understand what she has done already and what she's hoping to continue.
And Steve, we haven't even mentioned state attorneys races, right? So there's a national online magazine, Bolts. It recently identified the 30 most important criminal justice elections across the country. 2 of them are in Florida, including here in Orlando. And these are the state attorney races in Orlando and Tampa, where the governor suspended the incumbent, the independently elected prosecutor, in this case Monique Worrell, replaced him with Andrew Bain. Now Monique Worrell is running against Andrew Bain to get her job back. That election is in the hands of Orlando and Orange and Osceola County voters.
I want to note that we are recording this on Thursday. Early voting ends this weekend, November 2nd or 3rd, depending on your county. Meanwhile, you can join the conversation on social media. We're at WCF TV on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find us on X at Newsnight WUCF. Okay, next tonight, Florida's constitutional amendments. There are 6 proposed amendments on the ballot this election. As we've discussed on the show, 2 are drawing most of the attention: abortion access and recreational marijuana legalization. As a Florida resident, former President Trump has had a few things to say about the amendments, supporting 3 on marijuana, opposing 4 on abortion. The governor has aggressively campaigned against both, and he did so again this week in Clearwater.
When you're reading these amendments, if you don't know what some of the words mean, if you don't know what this would do, if you don't have a very firm sense of that, you should vote no. And I don't care where you stand on these issues. This is about something even bigger than normal issues. This is something that is going to be a part of Florida forever.
Ron DeSantis there. Well, Newsnight asked Florida political analyst Susan McManus about the impacts the amendments might have on the election as a whole.
What everyone is watching is whether Amendments 3 and 4, but particularly Amendment 4, the abortion initiative, how much that will gin up turnout and some crossover voting. Obviously, the proponents of that amendment are counting on a hefty number of Republicans crossing over to vote yes on that. And they're also counting it on a way to stimulate the turnout, particularly of young women. So we will see, but in terms of the passage of that amendment, the polls that have been taken have been very close, but they have shown around 30, 35, 40% Republicans voting for that, but it's still narrowly passing on the 61% as the poll that was done most recently.
Susan McManus there. Well, the governor staked a lot on defeating these amendments, Curtis. We've got some polling on it. What does it show?
Take first, I guess, Amendment 3, looking at that one, it's very interesting here. By looking at the polling, it's looking like this will actually pass here in the state of Florida. But I guess it kind of just depends, again, on the voter turnout and who's actually coming out to vote and how they vote when you look at it. That's what the polling says, and that's honestly, when you look across the board here, I'm going to say that while it shows that, Amendment 4 people will likely pass as well, I think it may end up being a little bit close counter here, because again, 60% is what we're looking at here. Yeah, that's the threshold here. So I think it'll be very interesting. We're seeing these early numbers of voter turnout right now. We've still got a little ways to go here, especially when you come look at the next few days, as well as on Election Day turnout.
I mean, some in the legislature would like that the amount needed to be even higher, around 67%. What do you think is going to happen there?
Yeah, the key is the 60%. Like a lot of states with these have successful like abortion rights amendments on the ballot, they just needed 50. So they essentially, it's essentially the same as like Democratic turnout, trying to get out, young women, things like that. Like essentially that became like, Democratic, campaign, the abortion rights, campaign. But the problem is it's 60 here. They need Republicans, so they can't really do that. So they can't make it seem too partisan. So it's very, very tricky for them.
I mean, you could have people crossing over, people that vote Republican, but also voting yes on Amendment 4, for example.
They need to. Oh, absolutely. I mean, polls consistently show both of these issues. They cross party lines, right? There's quite a bit of support for both of them among Republicans. These are not just partisan issues. Like, to everybody's point, 60% is an enormously high threshold. I mean, there's a lot of ink has been spilled on just how Ron DeSantis sort of stormed a re-election in 2022. He did not get 60%. No partisan politician will get 60% of the vote when they're faced with in a fair district, a non-gerrymandered district against an opponent from the other party. So if these are going to pass, and it's going to be very close, it's going to require bipartisan support, cross-partisan support.
I mean, there is enough. I guess a lot of it's going to come down to who is still undecided to make up that sort of 2 or 3% that is needed for those amendments to pass. I want to talk about the DeSantis administration's tactics here. I mean, he's definitely raised some eyebrows. I mean, let's talk first of all about his threat to, or his administration's threat to TV stations that are running ads supportive of Amendment 4. I mean, the group that took out these TV ads in question is suing, right, to stop the state from, I guess, enforcing its threats. There was a court development on that this week, right? What's the status there?
Yeah, the same judge, Mark Walker, who initially, I think the phrase in there was, it's the First Amendment stupid.
He's becoming a very familiar name.
Yeah, so he's also very quotable. So yeah he essentially just doubled down on that, saying this is just straight up a First Amendment issue. You can't threaten people, threatens TV stations for playing an ad.
The Florida Department of Health, Jason, seems to be playing a pretty significant role in opposing Amendments 3 and 4, right? I mean, how unusual is it to see that kind of state involvement?
Oh, this is utterly unprecedented in Florida, and in a state with a long history of petition drives for constitutional amendments that politicians in Tallahassee despise, right? I mean, it's just a couple of years ago, there was a petition drive to raise the minimum wage. Jeb Bush famously hated the amendment to mandate lower class sizes in public schools. But no governor before has ever used state resources and weaponized state powers against citizen-led petition drives the way this governor has. The governor's office and all these state agencies have repeatedly refused to answer basic questions about how much they're spending and where they're pulling this money from. So it's forced reporters like us to do a lot of digging in public records to try and figure this out. And from what we can tell, it looks like the administration has now spent more than $19 million of taxpayer money on this campaign. And this is an enormous amount of money. It's never been done before. The government has never gotten involved with campaigning against an election that we're also trusting it to sort of administer fairly, right? We've never seen anything like this.
I mean, do you agree that it's weaponization? I mean, the governor would say he's using state resources to protect Floridians, right, from what he sees as malign actors on the other side.
Yeah, like in his mind, these are bad proposals. It's a whole nonpartisan thing. So he's just looking at it as the governor and saying that well, there's things wrong with this, there are things wrong with that, so I'm going to use my, bully pulpit to oppose them. But like he said, this is just unprecedented to do it in such a huge, sweeping way, including even the Department of Transportation getting involved in this. It's a lot. It's a lot.
The governor's objecting to the fact that there is no, I guess, in the amendment, there's no definition of fetal viability. He's also concerned about the parental consent part of it.
Yeah, and Steve, remember, nobody is saying the governor can't go out and personally campaign against these amendments. And people, he has an obligation to speak up, use his voice to say what he thinks about issues of importance. Nobody is saying he can't go out and raise private money, political money, like every other political campaign does. What we're talking about here is taking money from taxpayers, many of whom support these amendments. Remember, whether or not we've talked about 60%, these need to get 60% to pass.
A little more than half,
Yeah. Polls consistently show both of these amendments are popular with more than a majority of Floridians, right? So you're taking money from those Floridians and paying to try and stop these. That's what the objection is here. It's not that he's campaigning against them himself, it's the fact that he's dragging public resources into it.
And I think, though, just really quickly here, I think the thing that he said, and I know he spoke here locally at Winter Garden a ways back, and then he spoke recently here, his whole bit here is about protection. That's what he's saying. It's like, hey, I'm doing this as a means to, protect people in Florida, making sure they understand, because he wants people to understand what's in the amendment, even to go so far to saying, hey, parents, make sure you read this. Do you know that there's a possibility that your children may be able to get an abortion without your permission here? So he says that it's okay to use those. From what he's trying to say here is it's okay to use those state resources because I'm doing a public service by, letting them know, hey, this is why this is not the way to go.
And we heard that point in the soundbite that we played just now. Be sure to check out WCF's voter guide, by the way, with in-depth information on races in Central Florida and throughout the state. You can find it at wcf.org/vote. Well, this election might give us a pretty good indication as to whether celebrity endorsements work. Kamala Harris's campaign has picked up many, including several Puerto Rican stars, Bruce Springsteen, and, of course, Taylor Swift. The Democrats hope she can help juice Gen Z turnout, which they believe will benefit the vice president's campaign. Some studies have shown young people more energized than ever, driven by candidate policies and, in Florida, the high-stakes amendments on the ballot that we just talked about. Well, Newsnight talked with one 20-year-old UCF student who's planning on voting for the first time and asked her what issues she thinks are important to her age group.
I think the biggest ones that I'm concerned about and the ones that are talked about the most are going to be Amendment 3 and 4, just that legalization of marijuana, as well as the topic of abortion and the government's role in that. I think just because you're looking at such a wide range of people. You're looking at everybody from a college student to a 6-year-old individual who may need the legalization of marijuana for various reasons. And you're looking at women, all women who can go through the most tragic things to, just not being in the right spot in her life and kind of being able to just make that decision for herself. So I think those are going to be the two biggest ones that I talk about and look at, and other people will.
All right, well, it seems like that person is motivated by the abortion and marijuana issues. Spectrum News 13 has done some reporting on this issue as well. Do we get an idea about what is motivating young voters here in Florida?
A lot of it is opportunity, Steve. That's what it all comes down to for a lot of young people. That's what we've been seeing. Nowadays a lot are saying that, hey, they can't.
Economics.
Economics, that's what it comes to. Hey, I can't afford to buy a home. Even if they are buying homes, they're doing so later in life. And so they're saying that, hey, these type of things need to change in order for me to have access so that I can, make the money that I need. And right now, they're not able to do that.
Cost of living continuing to be an issue. What do you hear?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like she said, the abortion and marijuana are just two major issues, for young people. But again, you just don't know if young people are going to vote. That's always been the case. When they lowered the age from 21 to 18 in the early 70s, it was, young people are going to flood the polls, and they just never do at the sort of levels that older people do.
I mean, that is true. Young people have historically proven pretty tough to turn out. Do the parties think they can change that in this election?
Yeah. I think you run into a couple of challenges. There's a lot of young folks that really sometimes don't start paying attention until like a week before the election, and there's, they need a lot of help to get registered to vote ahead of time and to get them prepared to vote. There are groups really trying to reach out to this demographic and help. You've got groups that are going, through dorms right now on college campuses, just reminding people to vote, getting them their early voting information. There are also just sort of unique challenges that young people face sometimes voting. So, for instance, we've seen like really long lines at UCF's polling early voting station here, and that's partially because a lot of university students need to update their address when they vote, and so that is contributing to long lines here. That's the sort of thing you can actually do in advance. Call the supervisor of elections office, change your address before you go to vote. That can help smooth that process. So trying to find ways to try and smooth out those kinks to help encourage more young people to get involved and make it as painless as possible, I think is really important.
What about the politics of Gen Z? I mean, some polls have shown that Gen Z males seem to be more open to President Trump than females. I guess that sort of reflects the broader electorate, right? I mean, do we see a trend among you young people, as we've seen with Latinos and Black Americans, of more openness to the former president, or are they still, do you think, a reliable bloc for Democrats?
We don't know. I mean, we'll find out next week. Yeah. But it's quite possible that young Gen Z seem to be even more than young millennials, especially men, possibly open to voting for Trump. But will those people turn out? Young men turn out to vote, even less than young women do. It's a question of. Yeah, they might like Trump. They may be the people they listen to, the podcast they listen to, may make them want to possibly lean towards voting for Trump. Have they registered? Have they thought about it until this week? That's the question.
Well, if you're a young voter, you can show us you're ready to vote. Post a photo of yourself exercising your right to vote on social media using the hashtag #ReadyToVote2024. Do not take a photo of your ballot, though. Meanwhile, you'll find a link to voting resources from Preserving Democracy, a partnership between WNET New York and PBS stations around the country, including WCF. It's on our website, wcf.org/Newsnight. But that is all the time we have for this week. My thanks to Jason Garcia, Stephen Lemongello, and Curtis McLeod. Thank you guys so much for coming in.
Yeah,
really appreciate your time today. Good conversation. We'll see you next Friday night at 8:30 here on WCF. In the meantime, from all of us here at Newsnight, take care and have a great week.